I'm Billy S, welcome back to the channel. Today we're starting a new little Soulsborne mini-ranking series. We've done the bosses, we've done the areas, but what about the enemies? Those that populate the world, offering you a challenge as you explore Miyazaki's fantasies. Today we'll be ranking my top 10 favourite enemies from the original Dark Souls, and you can expect videos covering the rest of the games and their enemies in the future, so stay tuned. For this video, I'm specifically focusing on non-boss enemies. Do they have a health bar when you lock onto them? If yes, they're viable, be it the clearest fodder of the undead Berg to the various mini-boss style non-respawning enemies found throughout Lordran. I only have two caveats though. No bosses who become regular enemies like the Taurus demons and the Capra demons in the Demon Ruins, or the Bell Gargoyles in Anor Londo. And no NPCs. Havel, Ricard, any of the invasions, they're not really what I'm after with this specific topic. So, which monstrosities are my favourite from the original Dark Souls? Let's find out. My top 10 Dark Souls enemies, ranked. Let me know your favourite enemies down below. Starting off today's list, we have a mini-boss enemy that appears twice in the game, and both times it manages to leave a lasting impression. Whether in the Darkroot Basin or Ash Lake, there's nothing more intimidating than the giant hydras that lurk there. These creatures live in the water, and once they spot the player, will begin firing blasts of water in your direction in an attempt to kill you from afar. In Darkroot Basin, these attacks are actually quite useful because they also damage the crystal golems that dot the riverbank, allowing for some fun enemy-on-enemy action. Once you're up close and personal, the Hydra will launch its heads towards you in a desperate attack. Either you'll be positioned well enough to avoid the strikes, or you'll be knocked down as one of the heads decides to bury right into the geometry you were standing on. To do damage, you can either shoot the Hydra from afar with arrows and magic, or attack the heads while they're in striking distance. The risk is that each head can only take so much damage before it breaks off, reducing the amount of weak points you can attack. And there have been rare instances where players do too much damage to the heads too quickly, causing the Hydra to soft lock, as it has 0 heads but still some health left to keep chugging. It's a bit ridiculous, but I've personally never ran into this problem myself. The Darkroot Basin Hydra is worth killing for easy access to the DLC cave and the best ladder in Dark Souls 1, which takes you behind the Crest of Artorias door in the Darkroot Garden. But of the two, it's the Ash Lake Hydra that hits me on a more atmospheric level. Here we're at the bottom of the world, an endless lake stretching out into the foggy distance. Barely any signs of life. If Hydras are what lurk at the top of the water, what could be waiting below the surface? Plus, the Ash Lake Hydra can actually follow you if you attempt to flee without fighting it, including a Free Willy style jump over the playable path to the Ancient Dragon, which is just iconic. If only it felt a bit more intuitive hacking off those heads, I'd likely rank this enemy in my top 5. As you'll see for the next few entries, sometimes an enemy doesn't need to be difficult or have a complex moveset for me to enjoy fighting them. Often, it'll just come down to what enemies I think have really cool designs and my personal experiences. Which is why the Crow Demons from the Painted World of Ariamis take my number 9 spot. They're a play on traditional harpies from Greek and Roman mythology, often appearing to ambush the player as you explore the rooftops and the towers of this snowy fortress. I have a particularly memorable death in my footage to these gals, because I wasn't expecting a full-on ambush of multiple enemies here. Their grab attack is brutal, their talons are sharp, and they're based on some of my favourite birds, the corvid family. Ravens are better, but crows get the job done just as well. They're also a useful enemy for their drops. See, if you're playing offline, the Crow Demons are the only creatures in Dark Souls 1 that drop souvenirs of reprisals, which are required to advance the Blade of the Dark Moon Covenant. And I had to create a nice farming route back in 2022 because, of course, I chose to 100% the Dark Souls trilogy, which involves leveling out almost every Covenant, while the online servers were down due to hackers. They're surprisingly tough, look fabulous, and just hit that design element of feeling cool and unique, even in a game like Dark Souls. They feel more like they belong in Bloodborne, but that just makes them even better here. You can tear my throat out anytime, divas. Next up on our list, we have an enemy type that I know is beloved by all of us who played Dark Souls. Not for difficulty or for moveset, well, maybe moveset. Most of all, for their adorable cries and familial bond. Yes, it's the mushroom people found in the Darkroot Garden and the bottom of the Great Hollow. Of all the enemies on this list, I think the mushrooms have the biggest sense of character to them. You'll first see the little baby mushrooms waddling along, and it's up to you whether you choose to slay them or let them run away. But where the babies roam, the parents are always close behind. They let out this tragic sound when you kill them that makes me feel genuine remorse for doing so. They're not trying to hurt the player, as even though they can attack, they'll often whiff it and look pathetic while doing so. The danger are the parents. These big mushroom lads and ladettes are tanky with a ton of HP, and on top of that, while their attacks may come out slow with a lot of wind-up, if any of their punches connect, well, you ever watched One Punch Man? The genuine fear at reaching the bottom of the Great Hollow and being faced with some of these larger parental mushrooms, while knowing you need to get past them to reach Ash Lake, with the sword of Damocles hanging over you as you know just one punch could send you right back to the top of the tree to try again. Ugh. No other enemy in this game puts the fear of God in me like the mushroom parents when I've mistimed a dodge or I'm backed into a corner, and just for that they fully deserve to be here. They even get a little reference in Farron Keep in Dark Souls 3 where you can find quite a few of their corpses, and I can only hazard a guess they all spawned from Elizabeth in the DLC too. This'll probably be the shortest entry on this list, as at number 7, we have the Frog Rays, found in Darkroot Garden, an enemy type that many players will never even see, because they're only found down a very specific side path that is often blocked by a living tree. In my first playthrough, nobody told me some of the trees were alive, so I never found my way down to their little chasm to meet them. It was maybe my 3rd or 4th playthrough I discovered these little goobers, and I instantly grew attached. In terms of battle, they only use their tongues either horizontally or vertically to swipe at you, as well as a jumping lunge attack. But it was discovered that they also have a water spit attack if they stand in a puddle. The issue is that there are no puddles in the area of the garden you naturally find them in, so nobody discovered this attack until deciding to drag the Frog Ray up to a part of the garden that does contain water puddles. Whatever the case, they are the most underutilized enemy in Dark Souls, and it feels like they could have been spaced out a little more in the world. Their coloring makes them feel fiery and demonic, yet their species is the exact opposite. I want to know more about these Frog Rays. I wish that we had a boss or mini-boss variant to further showcase the design, as they look so cute and cool. Nothing else for me to add, I just wanted to spotlight one of the rarest enemies in the game. Taking our number 6 spot, we have the last of the, shall I say, more generic enemies in the game, as we take a trip to Oolacile and talk about its residents. I'm cheating a little bit by including both the townsfolk and the mages as one whole entry, but I think of all the basic area enemies in Dark Souls, they have the best theming. Their designs are unique, these bulbous, red-eyed creatures with hulking limbs, elongated body parts, almost monkey-like in the way they clamber forwards with their giant hands. Or the mages, who are these tall, thin, tree-like women who are slaying serving Gonyo, and who can absolutely dark bead you into oblivion. In terms of actual fighting, I find the residents to be great melee-focused encounters, who often gang up on you with larger numbers, or well-placed ambushes to take down the player, while the mages are often hidden around corners or atop balconies, placed out of reach, so you have to use caution when approaching. Sure, there are some bullshit moments, such as this room with these dark mages inside that you can't predict unless you know they're there, but they're few and far between. It's really the visual design of these enemies in the context of this DLC that works wonders for me though. You're constantly progressing downwards in Oolacile, and as the light fades away, the darkness creeps up, and those glowing red eyes of these enemies stand out all the more. There's nothing more ominous than that first encounter in the Chasm of the Abyss, where these enemies are just watching you from a distance as you see the piercing red gazes as you approach. It's just something that really stuck with me, and honestly that's all I need to consider an enemy iconic. They're endgame threats who can do a ton of damage, have a lot of versatility, and whose designs are truly horrific and inspired. Hey viewers, a brief moment of your time. It's February, I'm officially moved to my new home, but the journey for 20,000 subscribers before summer of 2024 doesn't stop here. Take a look at how many of you aren't subscribed, kinda crazy, right? So be sure, if you enjoy the rest of this video, to parry that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on all my future rankings and videos. Back to the list. Starting off the top half of today's video, we have the Titanite demons, found throughout Lordran in various positions. Be it the ones settled in next to Andre, the copious amounts found in the tar pits of Sen's fortress, the one hidden in a small chapel in Anor Londo, or the respawning one in Lost Izalith that makes the Daughters of Chaos shortcut a bit of a pain to deal with. Perhaps my favourite Titanite demon though is the one hidden in the catacombs. You enter this long, dark stretch of hallway, and at the end, barely illuminated by the gloom, a single Titanite demon awaits. Players who don't pay attention will 100% get jump scared by this creature, and I'm here for it. I find that stuff hilarious. These creatures are the poster boys for mini-bosses in Dark Souls and require a lot of skill to take down. Some easier than others, the first two in Sen's fortress hit weak enough, but the two in the back of the tar pit are beefed to high heaven. They have their spears that they can slam you with, they can jump towards you to impale you to the ground, and of course they can summon the power of electricity to strike you from range. The challenge of these beasts comes from the fact they're always fought in awkward locations though. The room behind Andre has debris littering the floor, which makes dodge rolling surprisingly tough. The tar pits in Sen's fortress prohibit movement without the proper ring, and the rest of the Titanite demons are all fought in small, compressed arenas. I love their design and the way they truly made you fight for their upgrade materials. They're an enemy type I was hoping would make a return in future games, but they were seemingly replaced by the giant crystal lizards of Dark Souls 3, which are a fair replacement, but they don't have that creepy design that the Titanite demons have. You may get frustrated fighting these guys, but ultimately I find their challenge is all the better for getting players used to fighting tougher opponents, and they're also optional, so you're not forced to go out of your way to fight them until you're ready to do so. Coming in fourth place, we have one of the most iconic enemy types in Dark Souls, the Black Knights. These non-respawning enemies can be found throughout Lordran in various nooks and crannies, hidden away, awaiting any challengers who dare to face them. Two can be found very early on in the Undead Burg and Parish, a sword and greatsword wielder respectively, and they're great practice in the early game for teaching the player how to parry effectively. As the Black Knights are dangerous upon first glance, but once you're able to learn their parry timings, they feel incredibly satisfying to defeat. And that's actually what I like about Dark Souls 1, parrying is so satisfying and doesn't feel like this, suddenly the game is easy, how boring moment. Instead it's an, oh, I've mastered the timings and feel like the time I put into this game is worth it moment. By the time I reach the kiln of the first flame and you get to fight the respawning Black Knights, it's great knowing I can farm them for their drops with a few simple parries and backstabs. I still remember my time struggling against them in my early playthroughs though, and they definitely taught me to get better. Now I always parry and kill the first Black Knight in the Undead Burg before progressing as just a rule of thumb. The two Black Knights in the Catacombs and the Tomb of Giants though still catch me off guard to this day, especially the Catacombs one. There's nothing more terrifying than falling through the floor into a room with a Black Knight ready to ambush you, especially when you're right near the end of the area and you're likely low on healing. It's a level of panic I can't describe. And God forbid you aggro the Tomb of the Giants variant while you have skeleton dogs and archers attempting to kill you at the same time. They're perfectly placed to provide memorable encounters, but of the three Knight-style enemies I have on this list, they're my least favorite, which means there are two more still to come, and that says a lot, I think. Taking today's bronze medal, we have the Mimics. You always remember your first time opening a chest at the bottom of Sen's fortress, only to get eaten and sent back to your bonfire, furious that you have to go through all those trap-filled rooms once more. I'd argue mimics are even more memorable that first time you attack one successfully, and then they grow legs and arms, and they stand up like a ballerina ready to slay the house down spinning kick boots. Their sound design is horrifying, with this permeating evil giggling that they do, followed by their surprisingly loud death cries that almost make me feel sad. You can tell mimics apart from regular chests either by the chain on the side of the chest being in a different position, or by zooming in and noticing their breathing. Either way, if you can get the drop on a mimic, you won't have a hard time. It's easy to whittle health down during their opening animation, so just make sure you have a slither of stamina to roll away from them once they begin their first attack. Their grab is naturally deadly, but their moveset is so iconic that I don't mind them having a grab that likely will kill me if it hits, even if it is quite delayed, which means you'll likely roll earlier than intended and get caught by it. Mimics have always been scary in games prior to Dark Souls, but nobody has made them quite so creepy and unnerving in the gaming space since. Usually it's like, oh no, this chest has teeth and a tongue, ooh. The addition of legs for days really changes the game, and they're so iconic they continued to be featured in Dark Souls 2 and 3. I still think they should have been in Elden Ring in some fashion, but perhaps we'll get a return of these classic creatures in the shadow of the Erd Tree DLC? A man can dream, alright? Grabbing today's silver medal, we have the Dark Wraiths of the Lower New Londo Ruins. Quite possibly one of the most iconic enemy designs in the series. Their skeletal armor and hooded visage are quite possibly some of my favorite enemy imagery in the franchise, giving that immediate sense that those are dangerous creatures you should not fuck with. Like other Knight-style enemies, they can be parried, but I feel their timings are the toughest to predict due to their surprisingly fast swings and combos. Sure, I can parry them like everything else, but I'll always mess up my timing on the first parry and end up catching them on the next hit instead after my stagger ends. The way they run towards you, arm outstretched with their dark hand active, is terrifying, and the way they can steal your humanity if they successfully grab you is reminiscent of False King Alant and his soul level steal from Demon Souls. A bit less dangerous here, but still worth the worry. Lore-wise, they were such a dangerous threat to Lordran that the city had to be flooded to contain them, and having to fight them amidst the corpses of those sacrificed to keep them back is such a dark yet cool backdrop for progressing through Lower New Londo. Kechachi. I always tried to fight them one-on-one, never aggroing more, because the moment a second joins the fray, the parry strategy goes out of the window, and then it becomes a case of dodging and blocking till you get a chance to strike. Also badass, they're some of the most threatening creatures in Lordran, and instead of a shield, they just raise their hand to deflect attacks. Come on, that is so cool. Now yes, they are backstab susceptible, but who isn't in Dark Souls? Their style, aesthetic, and overall vibes land them the spot of number 2, and they even got a chance to return in Dark Souls 3 in the Farron Keep, so it's clear the developers love them as well, but they're not my number 1. My favorite enemies in Dark Souls are the ones that, while not difficult to me now in any way, were the best at teaching me how to get good at a time where I was still struggling with the game's combat. So come on out, Anor Londo's Silver Knights. Dotted throughout the main cathedral, the sword and spear-wielding Silver Knights were better than any other enemy at training me in the ways of the parry. When I got here on my first playthrough, I was baby. I blocked, I attacked, I dodged, but I was so afraid of parrying. People always made it out to be so hard, so I was just put off even trying for fear of just being ridiculed. Only the Silver Knights ended up being the perfect parry enemies due to their telegraphed attacks. If you succeeded at parrying them, you'd feel fantastic and do some healthy damage before repeating the process, while failing meant you'd take a decent chunk of damage, forcing you to get better to avoid that mistake in the future. Given the Silver Knights are the main enemy type in the Cathedral too, and learning to parry them all, funneling them into your shield of destruction, became even more satisfying and worth learning. Of course, I can't go on without mentioning the two most infamous Silver Knights in all of Soulsborne, the Anor Londo Archers, who guard the path into the Cathedral with some of the best snipes we have ever seen. Many people hate this pair, but I always found them to be quite the learning tool. Parry the one on the right, and you can use the visceral attack animation to avoid damage from the knight on the left. It's one of the toughest setups you'll face in the game as a new player, but learning to handle these chumps has made it a breeze on future playthroughs. There's just something to me about enemies that I've spent hours and hours practicing and killing without getting bored. I love getting to flex on them in every playthrough in a way that gives me the best amounts of serotonin, and nothing will change my mind. They may not be memorable for everyone, but for me, the Silver Knights are the best tools for the player towards getting better at the game. Their armor set is clean and well-fitting, and overall, they deserve recognition for how well designed they actually are. A deserving #1 spot if I do say so myself. And that's my list. There were so many enemies I wanted to include but couldn't. Vagrants, the undead assassins of the lower undead burg, the list goes on. Let me know your favorite enemy down below, and be sure to parry that subscribe button to stay up to date on all of my future videos. My socials are on screen now, feel free to follow where you feel comfortable. I recommend my Twitter, my Blue Sky, which is now open to the public, and my Discord. All of those links are down below. A massive shout out to my patrons on Patreon for supporting me for another month. Thank you all so much, you guys are amazing, and I will see you in the next video for another fun topic. Adios!